There we go.
Yeah, so as you pull that up, I mean, IAM, like I said, is one of those incredibly painful services that these days, like I dread if I have to do anything natively with IAM, because it just gets so complex so quickly that any announcement around IAM is something that I just love to jump into right away and understand what it is, because as long as it makes our life simpler, I think it's incredibly valuable. IAM is the bedrock or the foundation of literally every single AWS service. Who or what a service can talk to, who can access it, how you operate with it, what are the permission schemes, what can it do itself, are all determined by IAM. So if you don't get the IAM stuff right, most likely you're going to spend countless hours debugging and trying to figure out what went wrong and what is the right set of policies to have so that two services or two sets of or two pieces of infrastructure can actually talk to each other.
And I suppose what makes it a bit more complicated, just thinking about this, is if there's n AWS services, then IAM has to deal with n squared issues because they all have to talk to each other or not in some way. So that's what makes it so involved. And n squared times cross account boundaries and all the different dimensions of every single service.
And you could actually end up creating multiple different policies, and you can attach multiple different policies to a set of services. So it's actually far more than n square. I think it ends up becoming n square multiplied by m, where m might be the different instances of policies that you might want to apply to that tuple of services.
I think we've all had the issue of like try to make an object public and saying, "Oh, there's a policy blocking it." And like, which one? Which one?
Exactly. And then invariably you end up just opening up everything, because like once you run into that many issues, you are like, no, I'm now going to create another policy that overrides all the other policies that were written before it. And there's a hierarchy of those. So it makes life incredibly complicated. And anything that we can do to simplify it is totally worth it.
Well, so that gets us to the content of this particular post, Access Analyzer. And so what it's saying is it can now review your CloudTrail history and identify actions used across 140 AWS services and makes fine-grained policies. So I think what this is getting at is very importantly is what you call the principle of least privilege, right? So you want policies that give as little access as possible to do the job done and no more. And I've seen places where people have given out the root credentials to every consultant that walks through the door and made a mess. I won't name who this is, but it was a mess. And this is what you don't want to do. You want every IAM access key to do as little as it can possibly do, and that way you prevent, as these keys get passed around and sent in Slack DMs and wherever else they end up, they can't do any more than they're meant to.
Yeah.
And one thing go ahead.
Yeah. So one thing that I haven't understood from this particular announcement, and I love tools like this that actually do all of this analysis for you and can generate very fine-grained policies. The part that I now struggle with, and again, back to the complexity of IAM, one of the ways that you stay organized within the IAM world is to have hierarchies of roles and permissions, because everything kind of is RBAC. So it's role-based access control for pretty much everything else. So you create the scheme of what the role is and what access you're granting, and then you have hierarchies around them. So someone like admin the admin policy is basically an aggregation of a bunch of different other policies, whether it be a power user policy plus IAM permissions added to it and so on. So that kind of hierarchy in management makes a little bit of sense, because then you know exactly who the groups are. Mapping the roles to a specific set of policies makes it really easy. Over here, if you're now going to generate fine-grained control, in one single policy, then you kind of lose out on that hierarchy, right? It's now your new policy is not an aggregation of the underlying policies. So if you make a change in one of your other policies, it should have reflected in the higher order policies, but it probably doesn't anymore. And that becomes a whole other management issue that you have to go deal with. So let's say
That's actually a really good point. So I see what you're saying. So if you say, okay, I want all policies of this particular type to now be able to write to this SNS topic because I'm adding a new feature to my logging system. Well, obviously that's not going to be in the historical data because it hasn't been done before. Yeah. But you lose that hierarchy because now there's no way you can say that. This is all data driven. And so one thing you could do is you can, and this would be the worst possible way to do it. You could flip on admin for everything for a week or two, let CloudTrail build up a history and then have it remake the policies. That seems a bit suboptimal.
No, but it's kind of like this. So think about it this way. If I want to grant access to something to L1, and then L2 of course has all the permissions of L1 and more. So let's say D1 is the additional permissions or policies that it has, and then L3 has all the permissions of L2 and a D2, which is the delta of new permissions. Something like this, if you started applying the fine-grained control, it would generate a policy for L3, which is a flat set of very fine-grained controls. Now, in an ideal world, I want L3 to only have the permissions of L2 and that delta, and L2 to have permissions only of L1 plus some delta. So I can't just change L1 and expect everything will cascade all the way up to L3. I will literally have to go now to every one of the L1, L2, and L3 policies and make explicit changes over there. And I can imagine how complex those documents are going to be. Generated policies are never simple, straightforward, well managed. They're going to be nightmares to.
And you're right that you have to reverse engineer it. And also, if you have some function that's doing something it shouldn't, then you use the CloudTrail history to generate that policy. That CloudTrail history is going to grant that permission because it's in the history.
Correct.
And so it's I guess it's the continuation of that garbage in, garbage out issue with machine learning. Is if this history is based on something that's not perfect, it's going to propagate that imperfection.
Correct. And I really wish it would make it easier. Like I wish the analyzer would actually look at all of the data and say, this particular policy grants way more permissions than needed. And this is the new policy that you should have, but then let someone figure out how to organize their stuff a little better. Or figure out the place where you would make the change to have the least impact, I guess.
Well, that gets into, I guess, what we're calling combinatorial optimization on this enormous search space. And just to kind of wrap up the segment, I mean, this is a hard problem, right? So as much as we can rag on IAM, this is a really hard problem. It's been
I agree.
Just looking at the history of it, just the AWS Labs had the AWS IAM generator, which took a bit of a different approach. Different companies like Salesforce has Policy Sentry, which is also all about building up IAM policies. IAM least privilege policy generator. Netflix made this thing called Aardvark and paired it with another thing called RepoKid, which is AWS least privilege. So it's a complicated problem that a lot of big organizations have taken a stab at. Here's a good blog post by AirBNB about access management at scale. I think the principle of least privilege is a really important one, but then how to...
Yeah, and I think that's a sound principle, but just implementing it is very complex.
Yeah, how to deal with that is another thing. Well, I think that wraps us up for today, and I think we've gone a little bit over, but it's a great discussion, and I'm glad that we were able to have that.
Absolutely. Looking forward to catching up with everyone next week. We'll have a bunch of other interesting and exciting things to talk about.
Definitely. All right, everyone. Well, thanks again. And hopefully you have a nice week, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, let's find the credits. Misplaced my banner. And there we go. Bye.
Is your AWS public cloud bill growing? While most solutions focus on visibility, CloudFix saves you 10 to 20% on your AWS bill by finding and implementing AWS recommended fixes that are 100% safe. There's zero downtime and zero degradation in performance. We've helped organizations save millions of dollars across tens of thousands of AWS instances. Interested in seeing how much money you can save? Visit cloudfix.com to schedule a free assessment and see your yearly savings.